God has a providential plan for our lives, how can we have a choice? And why then do we need to pray about things?
Well, the second part of this question is easier to answer than the first, so let me take it in that order. Why pray? God, as it were, knows already what He's going to do. My wife has asked me that question on a number of occasions. Why pray? As I say, if God knows what He's already going to do. Well, we pray because God commands us to pray. Men ought always to pray, He said, and not to faint. We're to pray without ceasing. When we pray, be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. God expects His children to pray. It is an evidence that we are His dependent children. We're not independent of Him, but we are dependent upon Him, and prayer is an indication that we are dependent upon our God. But we must not view prayer as us getting God to do our will on earth, but prayer is God getting us to the place where His will is done on earth. You see, God, when we pray, it brings us into line with God's will. It isn't God coming into line with our will. We must view prayer in that way. We pray, we seek God's will on an issue. And we say, Thy will be done. So God commands us to pray. That's why we pray. And it is a means of grace. Now for the first question, if God has a providential plan for my life, do I really have a choice? Well, God's will is said to consist of His decretive will, that which He has decreed and cannot be changed or reversed, and His permissive will, in which God permits those things which will lead to the accomplishment of His decretive will. I think the best way to answer the question is by taking a biblical example. This is how I best could answer it. I take the example from the life of Jonah. God's decretive will was for Jonah to go and preach to the city of Nineveh. And yet God permitted Jonah in His permissive will to make the choice to go to Joppa. And yet in the end, God's decretive will was done, and it was accomplished because Jonah eventually went and preached on to the people of Nineveh. And so they're not, as it were, they do not negate each another. God's permissive will is always submissive to His decretive will. His will be done. We read there in Job chapter 23, verse 14, For He performeth the thing that is appointed for me, and many such things are with Him. Let me quote Burkhoff on this. The Bible certainly does not proceed on the assumption that the divine decree is inconsistent with the free agency of man. It clearly reveals that God has decreed the free acts of man, but also that the actors are nonetheless free and therefore responsible for their acts. He quotes Genesis 50, verse 20. But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it to good, to bring it to pass as it is this day, to see those people alive. Mr. Park, he's quoted there Acts 2, verse 23. Him being delivered by the determinate counsel and foreknowledge of God, ye have taken him by wicked hands, ye have crucified him. And Burkhoff went on to say, it was determined that the Jews should bring about the crucifixion of Jesus. Yet they were perfectly free in their wicked course of action and were held responsible for this crime. And so, in the will of God, the decretive will of God, in the permissive will of God, men are free to make the choice. And yet God knows He will perform the thing that is appointed for me. This question is a very difficult question to try and understand and contemplate. I don't know if I've answered it maybe to your satisfaction, but maybe ask another individual who I asked the senior minister concerning this last night. I rang him because it was one of the toughest questions, I thought. And again, he was unable just to point me in the most clearest of directions. And I trust that even from the example of Jonah, we can understand, yes, God had His decree. God had His will for Jonah's life. Jonah made choices, and and yet God's will was eventually accomplished within his life.